Good Morning PD on Live 95, the PD's gathering place. Now, back to the show.
Welcome back to Good Morning PD Live 95 on a Monday morning. Guess what? It takes Mondays to make Fridays. 843-661-0937. That's easy to say at about 4:30 this morning.
Yeah.
And I won't repeat exactly what I said under my breath, but it was to get me motivated.
You didn't say something bad as the first words of the day
it
on
was
a
to
Monday
get
morning.
me motivated. You and I talk a lot about trying to bank sleep on the weekend. I mean, during the week, Monday through Friday, the Rev and I get up real early. We do this craziness for 3 hours every morning, and then he's got a job at the radio station. I got 2 or 3 other endeavors I'm always trying to manage out and about. And I've read a lot about banking sleep. Can you or can you not? It's just hard. And we talk about, I've told the story about Saturday and Sunday in my normal life. I woke up at about the same time I did Monday through Friday. I've always been an early riser. I worked in a blue collar business that you had to get up early. I mean, just absolutely, there was no choice. I mean, my father insisted that you get up early and go to work. We started in the plant at 7 o'clock, so I'd always get there by 6:15 or so to open the gates and, turn the air compressors on and all that fun stuff. Get a little bit of nugget of news and a cup of coffee and, whatever the delicacy of the day was, a honey bun or a pack of Vienna sausages or potted meat or something like that.
And good for
I don't
you, too.
drink the juice off the vine. Even I have boundaries, and I've got some places I won't go. I won't drink the juice off of the Viennas, but I will eat the. What are you rolling your? I forgot you're a city boy.
Thinking about that.
I forget you're a city boy.
Yeah.
But getting up early as we do to do this, I mean, you live by the mantra. It takes Mondays to make Fridays indeed.
I want to follow up a little bit on Joe's call from last hour. And I think maybe part of what he was asking is has conservatism, what is conservatism, or has conservatism changed over the years?
He was talking about conservatism in the light of how do you call yourself a conservative and allow the government to be $20 trillion in debt to run deficits every year.
And I think that's a great question.
That's a great question. But I think you've got to go, if you believe in something, why is it that you believe in that? And I can't answer this question for everybody else. I can only answer it for myself. To me, the first pillar of conservatism is liberty, freedom. I mean, they kind of play into the same. I believe that individuals possess the right of, as the Constitution and Declaration of Independence, our founding documents, the life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, prosperity. I think that conservatives believe that there should be freedoms from the restrictions of arbitrary forces. I think at its core, that's what a conservative believes. They believe in kind of a natural free will. That means that you have the ability, Rev, to get up at 4:30 or not. Nobody makes you get up at 4:30. You've got financial obligations, as I do. The only way I have figured out to meet those financial obligations is to get out of the bed, but nobody makes me do that. That's something I do on my own natural free will. Now, I suffer the consequences of not getting up at 4:30, or I reap the rewards of getting up at 4:30. But I think above all, and I think in today's modern intellectual conservative and the debate that lies within, it means freedom from oppression by government. I think of the freedom to own property, the ability to allocate your own resources in a free market. I think those are the virtues of conservatism. Now, we can go down this philosophy of tradition and order. Conservatives believe in things that have served humanity well. We talked about marriage much earlier this morning. Conservatives believe that marriage is a societal institution. I believe, I'll be spiritual for a second, I think it's a gift from God. I think it's a covenant that God gave man at the beginning of time. I think marriage, in my opinion, is a man and a woman. But, we live in a country that is deemed something other than that, to be rule and law of the land and in order. That's the way the world works. But I think when you go to the virtues of conservatism, there's a lot of different places you can go. You can go to budget deficits, and you can go to restrictive policy, and you can go to free markets or not. But I think at the end of the day, the first pillar of conservatism is and always has been liberty and freedom. You have a right to be protected from government oppression. If you look at the Constitution, a lot of people don't, but if you really review and value the Constitution is not a document, Reb, to protect government from man.
Right.
The Constitution, as it's written, is a document to protect man from an oppressive government. And I think when you talk about $20 trillion of debt, when you talk about some of the high states and their tax policies and the federal government and the number of mandates and stipulations and regulations and all these other things that this government is heaped upon of the average working man, it's hard for a conservative to get his arms around. Now we can talk 20 trillion or 18 trillion or 16 trillion, or we can talk about policies that liberate the private sector or policies that restrict and constrict growth within the private sector. But I think to me, conservatism always has been about a person's right to make its own decisions and to live the consequences of that decision. Now, you can say conservatism has gone lacking because there have not been enough people that believed in those values and virtues because, in essence, in a free market, guess what? Your retirement is left up to who? Your health care is left up to who? But government started down that slippery slope of what I'd argue social engineering. Now, we could also have a counter-argument. I've read a lot about this, the failures of the church. I mean, when you go down history and you look at the American experience and the American experiment, there were many places in our early days that the church was the agent that took care of certain things. And then the church, Richard said earlier, what comes in my head comes out of my mouth, and that can be a good or bad thing. I think the modern church has failed in many ways in providing the necessary components to be the safety net. And I think the other entity, large and creative enough and with the financial resources to become the social engineer of America, is the federal government. Thigpen says it more articulate than I. The world changed about 104 years ago when we did what? When we implemented the income tax. And when we implemented the income tax, guess what? The federal government had a lot of money to do a lot of things. And they looked around and said, well, we got this ill of the world. We got that ill in the world. We got this problem in our society. We got all this money, and it's a bigger pot of money every single year. Why don't we help people who didn't make preparations for retirement? Okay, that sounds worthy. Makes sense to me. Now it flies in the face of conservatism. Why? Because if you believe in conservatism, what do you believe? You believe that person should have been responsible enough to take those preparations. Now, I don't believe any conservative disputes the fact that we need a safety net. I think when you live in an orderly and orchestrated, organized society, I think there is a humanitarian obligation we have to our fellow man. And I think back to the realities of government, the pragmatist in me says, okay, government's the only entity capable of orchestrating some of these societal issues we deal with. I'm not talking about lazy bums and no-count people who beat off the system. I'm not talking about those. There's a small fragment of our population who end up in a bad place through no fault of their own. If the church is not there to take care of that, then who can? Well, the government can. But what I would argue that we've allowed the safety net to become kind of a safety hammock. And instead of kind of holding on, you lay in it and you bask in it and you take advantage of it. And once again, I believe in this real complicated country theory called the slippery slope. And I think human beings have a tendency to spend other people's money in a different way than they spend their own. I've told you this before. I've served a lot of time in government. I have taken a lot of votes with other people's money. I never signed a personal guarantee. There were some council meetings. There were some Senate sessions. I didn't vote in the Senate, but on rare occasions when there was a tie, I never remember signing a personal guarantee to spend your money. And I wonder how government would be different and treated and managed and handled differently if indeed people were looking at that money just as if it were their money. But back to Joe's comments, I don't know that the ideas and principle of conservatism means we can have $5 trillion in debt, means we can have 10 trillion, 15 trillion. I don't know what that means, but in all honesty, I think we're getting to a tipping point that we've got big trouble because about, I don't know, $600 billion of our budget now goes to service debt. I mean, we've got a serious issue with government finance on our hands now. We got a lot of things we fund with our federal government. It's hard to blame the Democrats for that. It's real hard to blame the Democrats for the debt and deficit when one party speaks to the virtues of conservatism but continues to Trump. I mean, to Joe's point about Trump. How many times have you heard Trump talk about the budget or federal outlays or cutting Medicare? I mean, they are talking about some Medicaid work requirements, but that's not a big deal at the end of the day. And I think that human nature has taken over as it relates to government, and it's hard to run for office. It's almost impossible to run for office, stand on a stump and say, vote for me, and I'm going to take your Social Security away. Vote for me, and I'm going to make Medicare more difficult for you to get and receive.
Never get elected.
Well, you'll never get elected, but I'll tell you this. Somebody one day will say that. Somebody one day will be forced to say that because there is a point of no return. There is a place that we go. I have no idea what that number is. Is it 25 trillion? Is it 30? I have no idea. I'm not understanding enough of that exotic finance. I know we can print money. I know we can devalue currency. We do all these creative things, quantitative easing, the bond buybacks and all these other sorts of real creative things within our federal treasury that allows us to do some of the things we've done. But there is a moment in time when investors say, I don't know that it's a good investment. I don't know if the U.S. can sustain itself with the enormity of debt. And my curiosity says, what in the world does that look like? But I think every time, and I've said this and we'll go to the phone, I've said this 100 times in my political and my private life. Every time you pass a law, every time you insist on a regulation, every time a statute changes that empowers government, guess what it does? It extracts a dollar out of the private sector and puts it into public coffers' hands. And government at its core is inefficient. It is not an efficient allocator of capital, period. And I think conservatives believe in principle to the ideas of liberties and freedoms that the free market is indeed the greatest evaluator of what money's worth.